Now let's see if we can be more precise about what it is that the child rejects in order to form psychosis. Page 150. About midway down the page. What is at issue when I speak of Verwerfung? This is that term that means rejection, refusal, foreclosure. At issue is the rejection of a primordial signifier into the outer shadows, a signifier that will henceforth be missing at this level. Now, what is this primordial signifier? I want to give you two definitions of this, one of which we can start to talk about now, the other will take a second for us to get into. The primordial signifier, this original symbol, what does it signal? What does it signify? What does it symbolize? First and foremost, it symbolizes nothing more and nothing less than the existence of symbolization itself. The primordial signifier signifies signification. We can put it that way. The primordial signifier, first and foremost, signifies that signification is occurring. The first word is the word that demonstrates that language exists. It signals the very fact of language. And that's what Lacan is getting at here with this primordial mythic signifier. It's first and foremost the signifier that signals to the child that language is in place. It doesn't matter what the word is. Seriously, literally, it doesn't matter what the word is. It matters that it's a word and that the child recognizes that it plugs into a system that is alien to them, foreign to them, a system known as language. That's the thing here. The primordial signifier is one that tells you that signification is an element. And this is what the psychotic subject rejects. A primordial signifier that signals that there's some signaling apparatus at work. Normal people, and I use the term normal here to indicate not what should be, but what usually occurs. Normal here just means usually, more often than not. The neurotic person is a normal person. More often than not, what happens is the child hears words, whatever those words are, and starts wondering what they refer to. One primary caregiver says this, and then another primary caregiver responds or seems to respond. They seem to be taking turns using words. One says one thing, the other says the other. The child doesn't know what these words mean. Remember this. The signifiers that the child first encounters, they have no meaning. They don't mean anything. The only thing they signify is the fact that somebody's doing something, using something that the child doesn't yet understand. They signify only the fact that signification is occurring. The child's first word that they hear may be honey. They don't know what that word means initially. All they know is they heard something. And then somebody else says, yes. They don't know what yes means either, but they recognize that there's some sort of a connection between what one person did and another person did. There's something that connects them. They seem to be using voices in certain ways. It's at this level that he's trying to get at, this primitive appearance of the signifier. So the primordial signifier is first and foremost a signal to the child that language exists as a force, an energy, a structure that is not of their own making, well beyond their control. They certainly can't use it, and certainly even past their understanding. Page 151. Lacan's going to give it another try. What does primordial signifier mean? He asks on 151. It's clear that it quite precisely means nothing. Now, anytime he says nothing, it's important. He doesn't just mean nothing in the sense of not something, the opposite of everything and so forth. He also means to think nothing as no thing, a thing that is created by the signifier no, which we'll come to in a moment. But for right now, just note, the primordial signifier means nothing. It doesn't mean. It actually doesn't signify. The primordial signifier is not a word that you can look up in the dictionary. It's your understanding that a dictionary exists. It's not a word in the dictionary. It's the existence of dictionaries and your relationship to them. That's the primordial signifier. It doesn't mean anything, or in other words, it means nothing. We're going to come back to that nothing in a little while. What I'm explaining to you here has all the characteristics of the myth that I was tempted to mention on that occasion that Monsieur Marcel Griel recounted to you last year, namely the division into our 4 primitive placenta. The first was the fox, who, tearing out his portion of the placenta, introduced an imbalance from which there stemmed a cycle that would involve the division of the fields, the bonds of kinship, etc. He's just saying, here's another myth. But the myth he's talking about, that Lacan's talking about, comes next on page 151. What I'm recounting to you is also a myth. For I in no way believe that there is anywhere at all a moment, a stage at which the subject first acquires the primitive signifier, that subsequently the play of meanings is introduced, and that after that signifier and signified have linking arms. We then enter the domain of discourse. What he's telling you is that this is not something that actually a child goes through, where first they acquire the primitive signifier. Here's the primitive signifier, child. Now you have that. Next, you're going to enter the play of meanings. Now you can understand that here are other signifiers that have meanings. And then you can understand that signifier and signified, word and meaning or concept, have linking arms. And then finally you'll be able to speak. It's not this like step-by-step process. In fact, the linearity, the chronological linearity implied by his myth, where stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, is not even how he gets at it. Recall, the logic he's using here is not temporal, but logical. The priority that he's working with, the fact that the child speaks, is not a temporal one. The closest it comes to being temporal is to say that it's a retrospective logic. By the fact that the child speaks, we can presume 3 or 4 other things. In other words, Lacan is not thinking from the beginning forward. He's thinking from the existence of language being spoken by a child and thinking backwards from there. Retrospectively, what needs to have occurred in order for us to make sense of and account for the fact that this child is speaking. And what I want to just note to you, because some of you are wondering where we're headed with all this, this is the basic structure of what we call critical thought. This is what critique looks like. When Immanuel Kant invents this genre of thought called critique, and it was invented, it didn't always exist. Critique as a way of being in the world is only a few hundred years old. It's from about the 1780s forward. Critique was fundamentally about asking questions of priority. Priority because they're important, but also priority because they ask what needs to have occurred in order for this thing to have happened. So you start from the fact that something exists, and then you have to ask yourself, what do I need to presuppose in order to account for the existence of this thing? Somebody has a ton of money. How did they get it? Critique is one of the ways that you can get at an answer to that question. You take something that exists and you ask, what has to have happened in order for this thing to exist? So if you see somebody with a child, you might presuppose that they have had sex before. Accurately or inaccurately, that's a presupposition. You presuppose that because they're with a child, that child must be theirs. You presuppose that that child must have been biologically theirs. You presuppose even sometimes a natural birth, where this person gave birth to this one. And you presuppose, as a matter of fact, that that person who gave birth to the little person was first engaged in a sexual act with another person that resulted in impregnation. All of that goes into just seeing someone with a kid. You presuppose all this stuff. We call these sometimes assumptions. A lot of times they're incorrect. Stereotypes work on this way. Critique, though, is about digging into those assumptions, the presuppositions, the assumptions that we make in order to account for why something is the way it is. What brought us to this point? What needs to have happened in order for me to make sense of seeing this person with a child? When we start asking these questions, what did I presuppose when I asked the lady what her kid's name was? What's your child's name? Think of all the presuppositions that go into that, because she could have responded and said, this isn't my kid. I'm actually just a friend taking this kid to school for my other friend. I don't even know this kid. This kid just showed up. I'm just trying to figure out what to do with it. You want a kid? You don't know what they're going to say, but you presume that this is the biological mother of this child, who's also not a virgin because she somehow had to have had sex. But, she could also be like, hi, I'm psychotic and God impregnated me. Immaculate conception, and this is the result. Here's your Lord and Savior, this little kid. Who knows? Critique is there to help you be mindful of the presuppositions that you bring to any given experience. What Lacan is doing right now is giving you a great example of critical thought in action. Don't forget that.